The emergency HOA meeting at the Elmswood Estates Community Center was already in chaos when I walked in. At the head of the room stood Nancy Bellows, our self-proclaimed neighborhood tyrant, clutching her beloved wooden spoon like it was a gavel of divine authority. Her face had turned a deep, alarming purple, and the veins on her neck pulsed in ways that probably deserved medical attention. She brought that spoon down hard on the folding table, making Mrs. Henderson's coffee leap out of its cup. "Glenn Mathers must join our association immediately," Nancy shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that could have started a canine chorus 3 blocks away. "He's been living here for 6 months, breathing our air, driving on our roads, and reaping the benefits of our property values without paying a single cent in dues." I rose slowly, savoring the moment I'd been preparing for weeks. The manila envelope in my hand felt heavier than paper should, 5 years of documentation and 1 glorious property survey tucked inside. "Actually, Nancy," I said, letting my voice cut through the stunned silence, "you've been living on my land for the past 5 years." The room went dead quiet. Nancy's spoon slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. Board member Tom Granger muttered something under his breath that definitely didn't belong in a community meeting. Nancy's face went from royal purple to ghost white so fast I thought she might pass out. Let me rewind for a second and explain how we arrived at this delicious scene of suburban justice. My name's Glenn Mathers, and at 50, I thought I'd found my slice of heaven when I inherited 10 acres of wooded land in Pine Ridge from my late Uncle Harold. Once farmland, the area had since been swallowed by cookie-cutter housing tracts and strip malls, but my property remained untouched. A quiet sanctuary of towering pines and wandering deer trails. As a civil engineer, I've spent my life obsessed with order, good design, solid foundations, and above all, accurate property lines. After 30 years of wrangling with city planners and construction crews, all I wanted was peace. I built a modest 2,000-square-foot home on the eastern edge of my land, angled for privacy, but close enough to the main road for convenience. Across that road sat Elmswood Estates, 47 houses, all cloned from the same architectural blueprint. And ruling over that beige kingdom was none other than Nancy Bellows, who dressed like a real estate convention clearance rack had exploded onto her. Navy blazers with shoulder pads the size of small wings, pencil skirts that tested the limits of physics, and enough hairspray to single-handedly dent the ozone layer. Nancy had won her HOA presidency in what residents politely called an election, though she'd been the only candidate, and half the ballots were mysteriously written in her handwriting. She ran the association like a personal empire, churning out new rules faster than anyone could read them. The bylaws ballooned from 12 pages to something resembling a phone book, micromanaging everything from mailbox heights to the precise range of approved front door colors. I hadn't even unpacked my last moving box before Nancy came marching up my gravel driveway, clipboard in hand, sensible pumps crunching against the stones, looking like a census worker who'd wandered into a dictatorship audition. "Mr. Mathers," she announced without greeting, "I'm Nancy Bellows, president of the Elmswood Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here to collect your initial membership fee of $200 plus 6 months of back dues for the construction period." I set down the box I was carrying and gave her my best confused engineer stare. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm not part of your HOA. This property isn't in Elmswood Estates." Nancy's left eye twitched, a sign, I'd soon learn, of her switching into full Karen override mode. She flipped through her clipboard with all the tension of someone defusing a bomb. "Nonsense. You're clearly within our community impact zone. Article 4, Section C of our updated bylaws states that any property sharing a visual corridor with member homes must comply with association standards." "Visual corridor?" I asked, intrigued by the sheer creativity of her delusion. "If we can see you, you affect us," she said with a perfectly straight face. "Therefore, you're under our governance. Also, those birdhouses must go. They're not approved models, and their color violates our earth tone mandate. The birdhouses, simple wooden ones built by my late uncle, had been home to generations of bluebirds." My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice even. "Mrs. Bellows, I respect your commitment to community order, but I own this land outright. It's not part of your HOA, and I have no plans to join. Have a nice day." Her face went through several shades before landing somewhere between coral and outrage. She shoved a paper toward me. "This is your first warning. Non-compliance will result in fines, liens, and restricted access to community resources." "What community resources?" I asked, genuinely curious. "The roads, Mr. Mathers. We maintain the roads." "You mean the public county road my taxes already pay for?" She huffed, spun on her heel, and click-clacked her way back down my driveway, muttering about uncooperative newcomers and declining property values. That encounter was only the beginning. Over the next few months, Nancy's campaign of harassment escalated from nuisance to obsession. I received official notices citing excessive gravel presence, unapproved wildlife encouragement, after she saw deer on my property, and a $300 fine for maintaining a non-conforming natural habitat. Every week brought a new absurdity: wrong grass type, solar panels with aggressive glare, even though they faced away from her street, and my personal favorite, a warning that my morning coffee on the porch violated community sunrise meditation standards. Each time, I sent back the same typed response: "I am not a member of your HOA. This property is not within your jurisdiction. Please stop harassing me." But Nancy didn't just ignore boundaries in her correspondence. One morning, I woke to the sound of a lawnmower and discovered her out there mowing a 20-foot strip of my land along the road. When I confronted her, she claimed with a straight face that it was now designated as a community green belt and needed to meet HOA standards. "You can't just declare part of my property as yours," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my rising blood pressure. "It's not yours anymore," she replied with a smug smile. "It's a shared community asset. Article 7, subsection 9, clearly states that any unmaintained land adjacent to HOA property can be claimed for community beautification. You can't just make up laws, Nancy." "I don't make them up," she said, revving the mower. "I interpret them for the greater good." I went inside and made 2 phone calls, one to my lawyer and one to my surveyor friend from my engineering days. If Nancy wanted to play property games, she'd picked the wrong opponent. What Nancy didn't know was that I wasn't just any engineer. I specialized in land development and had spent 15 years dealing with property disputes. I knew survey maps like most people knew their favorite recipes. And something about Nancy's corner lot had been bothering me since I'd first reviewed my uncle's property documents. My surveyor friend, Jake Morrison, came out the following week with his equipment. We spent the entire day taking measurements, comparing them to the original plat maps from the 1990s, and cross-referencing them with county records. What we discovered was better than I'd hoped. "Glenn," Jake said, pulling up the data on his tablet, "you seeing what I'm seeing?" I looked at the overlay of the original survey against the current property lines. "That's a 30-foot discrepancy on the eastern boundary." "Not just any 30 feet, Jake grinned. "That's 30 feet that includes Ms. Bellows' corner lot, her house, her precious herb garden, and that gazebo where she holds her HOA board meetings. They're all sitting on your land." The surveying error had happened in 1993, when Elmswood Estates was first developed. The developer had incorrectly marked the boundaries, and no one had ever challenged it. The houses were built. The HOA was formed. And Nancy had been living on my uncle's land for 5 years, completely oblivious. My Uncle Harold, bless his soul, had known about it but found the whole situation amusing. He'd left a note in his papers that simply said, "Let them think what they want until they become a problem." Well, Nancy had definitely become a problem. I spent the next month preparing. I had Jake create official survey documents. I pulled county records showing the original land grants. I documented every single instance of Nancy's harassment, from her fabricated fines to her illegal mowing of my property. I even had a real estate attorney review everything to make sure my case was airtight. Then Nancy made her fatal mistake. She called an emergency HOA meeting specifically to address the Glenn Mathers problem. The agenda, which she helpfully posted on every door in Elmswood Estates, listed items such as enforcing compliance through legal action and protecting our community from non-conforming neighbors. I decided it was time for the reveal. Which brings us back to that beautiful moment in the community center, with Nancy's spoon on the floor and her face cycling through expressions like a broken slot machine. That's impossible. Nancy finally managed to sputter. I've lived here for 15 years. This is my property. I have a deed. You have a deed, I agreed, pulling out the survey documents, for a property that was incorrectly plotted. According to the original land grant and the corrected survey, your eastern property line is actually 30 feet west of where you think it is. I spread the maps on the table for everyone to see. The room erupted in whispers as people leaned in to look. Tom Granger, who'd always seemed to enjoy Nancy's power trips a little too much, suddenly looked very pale. This is ridiculous, Nancy shrieked. You can't just come in here with your fake documents and try to steal my home. I'm not stealing anything, I said calmly. I'm simply clarifying boundaries that were incorrectly recorded 27 years ago. And I've been quite patient. After all, you've been using my land for 5 years without permission or payment. This is harassment, Nancy pointed a shaking finger at me. This is exactly why we need strict HOA enforcement. People like you think you can just waltz in and destroy our community. Actually, said a voice from the back of the room, I think Mr. Mathers has a point. Everyone turned to see Dennis Palmer, a retired judge who lived 3 houses down from Nancy. He walked forward and examined the documents. These appear to be legitimate county records. If there was indeed a surveying error, Mr. Mathers would have grounds for a boundary dispute claim. Dennis! Nancy gasped like he'd just stabbed her in the back. You're on the board! You're supposed to support the HOA! I support the law, Dennis said mildly. And if Mr. Mathers owns the land your house sits on, well, that's a significant legal matter that supersedes any HOA authority. Nancy's face had gone from white to red to a concerning shade of purple. This is a conspiracy? You're all jealous of my leadership. I've maintained property values. I've kept out the riffraff. You've harassed a man who wasn't even in your jurisdiction, I interrupted, and now you're going to face the consequences. I pulled out the next document from my envelope. This is a formal notice of trespass and a demand for 5 years of back rent for the use of my land. Given the square footage and current market rates, that comes to approximately $2,000 per month, $24,000 a year. Someone in the audience did the math out loud. For 5 years, that's over $100,000. $120,000 to be exact, I said. Of course I'm willing to discuss alternatives. Nancy gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. What kind of alternatives? She managed through gritted teeth. Option 1. You can purchase the land your house sits on at current market value, which, according to my real estate assessment, is $97,000. Gasps rippled through the room. Nancy's eye twitched so hard I thought it might detach. Option 2, I continued, enjoying myself perhaps a bit too much. You can sign a 5-year lease with strict terms, $800 per month, and the lease includes several conditions. What conditions? Nye's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. First, you immediately cease all HOA enforcement actions against my property. Second, you acknowledge in writing that my land is not and has never been part of your HOA jurisdiction. Third, you remove any and all references to my property from your bylaws and community documents. And fourth, I paused for effect, you maintain a sign on your property, visible from the street, that reads, "No HOA activity permitted for the duration of the lease." The room grew so silent, you could practically hear Nye's hairspray cracking under the strain. "This is extortion!" she hissed. "No," Dennis Palmer interjected firmly. "This is a property owner exercising his legal rights. Rights that exist because you, Nancy, failed to do proper due diligence before expanding your HOA authority to properties you had no claim over." "I'll sue!" Nancy shrieked, spittle flying. "I'll take you to court!" "Please do," I replied evenly. "I have 5 years of documentation showing your harassment, your trespassing, and your fraudulent attempts to collect fees you had no right to demand. I also have this." I pulled out my final document, a thick folder containing every single violation notice she'd sent me, every fabricated fine, every threatening letter. "By my calculation," I continued, You've attempted to fine me over $18,000 for violations on property you had no authority over. That's fraud, Nancy. Criminal fraud. The room went utterly still except for the sound of Nye's labored breathing. Board members began subtly edging away from her as though she were radioactive. Tom Granger actually got up and moved to the back of the room. You have 1 week to decide, I said, gathering my papers. Purchase, lease, or we go to court. Your choice. Nancy chose none of the above. In what can only be described as a spectacular display of denial and entitlement, she spent the following week rallying what few supporters she still had, trying desperately to prove that I had fabricated the entire survey. She even hired her nephew, who claimed to be a paralegal but actually worked at a print shop, to draft a legal response. It was so full of imaginary statutes it read like sovereign citizen fan fiction. She sent me a 30-page document titled Counter Notice of Rightful Ownership and HOA Supremacy, which claimed, among other things, that HOA law superseded county records, that continuous use established ownership regardless of deeds, and that I was guilty of malicious undermining of community harmony. Then she tried to organize a protest, plastering flyers around Elmswood Estates, calling for residents to stand against property theft. Exactly 3 people showed up: Nancy, her sister Donna, who didn't even live in the neighborhood, and Mrs. Patterson, who thought they were protesting the new cell tower and left once she realized her mistake. So I did exactly what I'd promised. I took her to court. The case was assigned to Judge Patricia Blackwood, a no-nonsense woman who'd spent 20 years handling property disputes and had zero patience for what she called suburban theatrics. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in September. Nancy arrived dressed as though she were attending a presidential inauguration, complete with a hat that had to be from the 1980s. She'd actually hired a real attorney this time, a nervous young man named Bradley, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I almost felt sorry for him as Nancy tugged on his sleeve and whispered furiously in his ear throughout the proceedings. My attorney, Sandra Chen, presented our case with surgical precision. The original land grant survey from the 90s showing the boundary error, the new survey confirming the correct lines, documentation of 5 years of unauthorized use, and the fraudulent HOA fines. It was like watching someone build a house of cards, except the cards were made of concrete evidence, and Nye's reputation was the table collapsing beneath them. Bradley tried his best, arguing about adverse possession and community standards, but Judge Blackwood shut him down swiftly. "Mr. Bradley," she said, peering over her glasses, "are you seriously arguing that an HOA's made-up rules override actual property law?" "Well, Your Honor," he stammered, "my client believes that the established community standards—" "Your client believes a lot of things," Judge Blackwood cut in sharply. "But belief doesn't change property lines. Mr. Matz, do you have the original survey documentation?" Sandra handed over the files. The judge reviewed them in silence while Nancy fidgeted so violently her hatpin came loose. "Mrs. Bellows," Judge Blackwood finally said, "not only have you been occupying Mr. Mather's land without permission, but you've been harassing him for not joining an organization he was never required to join. You've attempted to collect fees you had no right to collect, and you've wasted this court's time with frivolous arguments." Nancy shot to her feet so fast that her lawyer had to grab her arm. "Your Honor, I've been protecting property values. I've been maintaining standards. Without the HOA, the neighborhood would fall into chaos." "Sit down, Mrs. Bellows," the judge said coldly. "The only chaos I see is the one you've created through your overreach and refusal to accept basic property law." The ruling was swift and devastating. Nancy owed me $37,000 for 5 years of unauthorized land use, the surveys proving she'd been occupying roughly 1/3 of an acre. She was given 60 days to either purchase the land at market value or sign a lease agreement. All fraudulent fines were nullified, and she was ordered to pay my $8,000 in legal fees. But the best part came at the end. Furthermore, Judge Blackwood announced. Given the evidence of harassment and fraudulent behavior presented here, I'm forwarding this case to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. Bradley went pale. Nancy made a noise like a deflating balloon. Your Honor, Bradley stammered. Surely that's not necessary. Attempting to collect $18,000 through false claims of authority is fraud, Mr. Bradley. The judge replied coolly. Your client is lucky Mr. Mathers only pursued civil action. Nancy fainted, actually fainted, right there in the courtroom. Her hat went flying, revealing that her perfect buff was, in fact, a partial wig, which also went flying. It took 2 bailiffs and a very embarrassed Bradley to get her back on her feet. The aftermath came swiftly. Within a week, word had spread through Elmswood Estates. An emergency HOA meeting was called, but this time Nancy wasn't running it. Dennis Palmer had taken charge, and the first agenda item was a vote of no confidence in Nye's leadership.